It's Saturday afternoon, March 25th, 1911. You're walking through Washington Place in Lower Manhattan, and the air smells like spring. The sidewalks are crowded, couples strolling, children playing in the thin March sunlight. You glance up at the Ash Building, 10 stories of brick and steel, and for a moment, everything is ordinary. Then you see it, smoke, dark and thick, pouring from the eighth floor windows. And then something falls. Not something, someone. A girl, her hair trailing behind her like a ribbon, plummeting toward the pavement, then another and another. You are witnessing the deadliest industrial disaster in New York City's history. In the next 18 minutes, 146 people will die, most of them young immigrant women. Their deaths will shake a nation, reshape American labor law, and raise a question that still haunts us. Who is responsible when the people in power choose profit over human life? To understand what happened inside the Ash Building, you have to understand who worked there. By 1911, New York's garment district was powered almost entirely by immigrants, young women and girls from Italy, Russia, Hungary, and Eastern Europe. They had crossed oceans in steerage, fleeing poverty, pogroms, and lives with no future. They arrived in a city that needed their labor, but cared little for their lives. The Lower East Side was packed, families of 6 or 8 crammed into single rooms in crumbling tenements. Work was not optional, it was survival, and the garment industry was hiring. The Triangle Waist Company, owned by Max Blanck and Isaac Harris, occupied the top 3 floors of the Ash Building. It was one of the largest shirtwaist manufacturers in the city. A shirtwaist was a women's blouse, simple, fashionable, enormously popular. And making them was grueling, dangerous work. The factory floors were designed for production, not for people. Rows of sewing machines stretched across long wooden tables, packed so tightly that workers sat almost shoulder to shoulder. Fabric scraps and tissue paper patterns littered the floors. Barrels of oil sat near the machines. The air was thick with lint and dust. The workers, roughly 500 on a typical day, were overwhelmingly female, many of them teenagers. Some were as young as 14. They worked 9 hours a day, 6 days a week, earning between $7 and $12 per week. Foremen watched them constantly, docking pay for damaged needles or minutes of lateness. And then there were the doors. The Ash Building had 2 stairwells and a single fire escape. One of the stairwell doors on the 9th floor was kept locked during working hours, a deliberate choice by management to prevent workers from stealing fabric or taking unauthorized breaks. This detail would prove catastrophic. The workers had tried to change their conditions. In 1909, 20,000 garment workers, most of them women, walked off the job in what became known as the Uprising of the 20,000. It was the largest strike by women in American history at that time. Clara Lemlich, a 23-year-old Ukrainian immigrant, had stood before a packed hall and called for a general strike. The strikers demanded shorter hours, better wages, and crucially, safer working conditions, including unlocked doors and adequate fire escapes. Police arrested hundreds, hired thugs, beat picketers on the streets. Many factories eventually settled. But Triangle's owners, Blanck and Harris, refused nearly all safety demands. The locked doors stayed locked. At approximately 4:40 p.m. on March 25, 1911, a fire broke out in a scrap bin beneath a cutting table on the 8th floor. The exact cause was never determined. A discarded match or cigarette is the most likely explanation. Within moments, the tissue paper patterns hanging above the tables caught fire. The flames leapt to the hanging fabric, and the room became an inferno. Workers on the 8th floor scrambled. Some grabbed pails of water, but it was hopeless. The fire fed on decades of accumulated fabric dust and oil-soaked wooden floors. The room filled with smoke in under a minute. Someone managed to telephone the 10th floor, where the offices were. Blanck and Harris received the warning. They escaped to the roof. But no one called the 9th floor. On the 9th floor, approximately 260 workers, almost all of them women and girls, had no idea what was happening beneath them until the smoke began seeping through the floorboards. By then, the stairwell on the Washington Place side was already filling with flame and smoke. They rushed to the other stairwell, the Green Street side, but the door was locked. Workers pounded on it, screaming. Some tried to force it open with their bodies. The crush of panicking workers pressed forward, and those at the front were pinned against a door that would not move. The single fire escape, a narrow, flimsy iron structure on the building's exterior, buckled under the weight of fleeing workers. It twisted, then collapsed, sending people plunging into the courtyard below. Witnesses on the street heard the metal groan before it gave way. With the stairs impassable and the fire escape gone, the windows became the last option. And this is where the horror of the Triangle fire seared itself into the memory of every witness. One by one, and then in groups, workers began jumping from the 8th and 9th floor windows, nearly 100 feet above the sidewalk. Fire department nets were deployed, but the force of the falls tore through them. Ladders reached only to the 6th floor. Firefighters stood in the street, helpless, watching bodies fall. United Press reporter William Shepard, who witnessed the scene from across the street, telephoned his editor and said simply, "I can't talk. Thud, dead. Thud, dead." Bystanders wept openly. Some tried to catch the falling workers. A crowd of thousands gathered, held back by police, listening to the sounds of impact. One firefighter later testified that the bodies hit the pavement with such force that they broke through the glass vault lights embedded in the sidewalk. The entire fire lasted roughly 18 minutes. By the time firefighters brought it under control, the top 3 floors of the Ash building were gutted. Inside, the scene was almost incomprehensible. Charred bodies piled against the locked 9th floor door, some still clutching their pay envelopes, which had been distributed just minutes before the fire started. 146 people were dead. 123 of them were women and girls. The youngest confirmed victims were 14 years old. Many were so badly burned that they could only be identified by small personal effects: a ring, a shoe, a locket. New York reeled. The morgue at Charities Pier on East 26th Street was opened to the public for identification. Families filed past rows of coffins, mothers looking for daughters, husbands searching for wives. The wailing could be heard from the street. It took days to identify all the dead. 6 victims were never identified at all. On April 5, 1911, an estimated 350,000 people lined the streets of Lower Manhattan for a funeral procession. It rained, a cold, steady downpour that soaked the mourners and turned the streets to mirrors. No one left. The procession moved in silence, broken only by weeping. Rose Schneiderman, a labor organizer and firebrand, stood before a memorial gathering at the Metropolitan Opera House and delivered words that cut through the grief with fury. "I would be a traitor to these poor burned bodies," she said, "if I came here to talk good fellowship. Too much blood has been spilled." Max Blanck and Isaac Harris were indicted on charges of first and second-degree manslaughter. The prosecution's case hinged on the locked door. Specifically, whether the owners knew it was locked and had ordered it so. Survivors testified. Workers described the bolted door, the pounding, the screams. But the defense attorney, Max Steuer, was one of the most skilled trial lawyers in the city. He cross-examined a key witness, Kate Alterman, forcing her to repeat her testimony until the jury began to suspect she had been coached. It was a devastating tactic. After deliberating for less than 2 hours, the jury acquitted both men. The acquittal provoked outrage. Blanck and Harris collected insurance payments of roughly $60,000, more than the factory's losses. In subsequent civil suits, they were ordered to pay $75 per victim to the bereaved families. $75 per life. But the dead did not die for nothing. The fire catalyzed one of the most sweeping reforms in American labor history. New York established the Factory Investigating Commission, led by State Senator Robert Wagner and Assemblyman Al Smith, both of whom would go on to shape national policy for decades. The commission conducted an exhaustive investigation of factory conditions across the state, visiting over 3,000 workplaces. Their findings led to 36 new laws governing fire safety, building codes, working hours for women and children, and sanitation standards. Doors in factories were required to open outward. Sprinkler systems became mandatory. Frances Perkins, a young social worker who had witnessed the fire from the sidewalk, was profoundly changed by the experience. She would carry the memory with her for the rest of her life. Through her rise to become the first female cabinet member in U.S. history as Franklin Roosevelt's Secretary of Labor. She later called March 25, 1911, the day the New Deal was born. The Ash Building still stands. It's now called the Brown Building, part of New York University. If you visit Washington Place today, you'll find a small plaque near the entrance. Students walk past it every day. Most don't stop to read it. But the fire's legacy endures far beyond a plaque. Every fire exit sign in every building you enter, every sprinkler system above your head, every outward opening door in every workplace. These exist because 146 people died in a building where the doors were locked. The fire escape was inadequate, and the owners faced almost no consequences. And the deeper question the Triangle fire raised, whether workers' lives are worth more than owners' profits, has never been fully settled. In 2013, the Rana Plaza garment factory collapsed in Bangladesh, killing over 1,100 workers who had been ordered to return to a building they knew was unsafe. They were making clothes for Western brands. The doors of history do not always open outward. Every year on March 25th, people gather at the corner of Washington Place and Green Street. They read the names aloud. Rosaria Maltese, age 14. Catherine Maltese, her mother, age 39. Lucia Maltese, her sister, age 20. One by one, the names carry into the air above a city that once watched them fall. We remember them not because we can change what happened, but because forgetting would be the final locked door.